are also required to be the language in the solicitations that we have. Disabilities must be included in all awards, the mention of disabilities and inclusion of disabilities. So any education projects and programming that we do must include people with disabilities or be able to eliminate the barriers. ADS 20, or the Directive 205 was established to require any new facility or new structure must adhere to the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that provides physical accessibility. The non-discrimination policy, again, emphasizes, or was established in 1997 and is still active today. Now, my role in the education office, where I'm coming from and what I'm working with, I am doing work to feed into all three of these goal areas that I mentioned before. And one of the things that I am trying to spread across USAID is the idea of the social model of disability, which is that children with disabilities do have the capacity to learn. It's the environment around them that needs to change, the mindsets of the people around them that need to change. We need to break through that status quo in order for them to be able to work with the children with disabilities, as opposed to the more traditional model of having to change the child to accommodate their environment, such as giving them a wheelchair or needing to somehow fix their disability or their impairment. Rather, it needs to be the physical surroundings that need to change. And that also includes changes in the classrooms, changes in the program activities, changes in the mainstream public education system. Our goal is to really get all of these children into the classroom and be able to receive an equitable quality education and way to learn so that they can readily access the education. So that's what I do in the Office of Education at USAID. We're also working with All Children Reading, which is a response to a Grand Challenge for Development, and it's a collaboration with the Australian government as well as World Vision. It was launched in 2011, and it's still an ongoing series of competitions that leverage science and technologies to create and apply scalable solutions to improve literacy skills of early grade learners in developing countries. We're really excited about this because it's based on two beliefs. One, that science and technology, when appropriately applied, can have a transformative influence. And the second thing is that we really want to engage the entire world on a global scale with different innovations and ideas to create these solutions to be able to break through these barriers. There are two rounds for All Children Reading. The first round, the first round rather did not have children with disabilities included. It did not have a disability track. The second round, they realized that it was a very vital thing to include. So as you can see on the PowerPoint here, there are 3 different tracks within All Children Reading. We have children with disabilities, mother language instruction and reading materials, as well as family and community engagement. And of course, today we'll be going into the track of children with disabilities. As you can see on the slides here, there are 12 different projects within these various regions. On the right side, this column with the yellow stars, these 4 stars, those are from the disability track, awards that have been granted. So in India, we have Benetech, and they make accessible books for students who are blind and low vision. Lesotho, they use Braille technologies to do teacher training and improve reading skills for blind and low vision students. Morocco, you'll be hearing more about today. And then also in the Philippines, they have teacher training and reading materials for blind and low vision students. Now from these 4 projects, 3 of them, Christina is involved with and knows about for the EGRA assessment. And I'm sure that she'll be able to speak on that later. Before I hand it over to Corinne to talk about Morocco, I would like to share one philosophical belief with you of mine about education. Many of us at USAID believe for education to become successful, there must be a systematic shift. And how that systematic change happens is in small increments. So you should take the principles for universal design and learning, take the solutions that work from there, from various people with disabilities, whether it's deaf or hard of hearing, whether it's Braille for blind and low vision. A variety of learning methods have already been discovered from the universal designs. Use those solutions and embed them into your teacher training, embed them into your classrooms, embed them into the various realms of education. And that will be the best way to get a systematic shift. Because if you look at people with disabilities, there's a spectrum of this population. There are some people that are, as society would say, have very severe disabilities. They are often excluded and left out of the larger population, but there are other, let's say, solutions and approaches and models that can be learned from these people with more severe disabilities. But in order to be able to do that, you've got to be able to include them. You've got to be able to think about different solutions of using sign language, Braille, and other ways to get rid of these barriers to be able to have benefits for everyone. Thank you, and I'll pass it off to Corinne now.
Thank you so much, Josh, for the overview. This is Deepa speaking again. Before we hand it over to Corinne, I also wanted to mention that if anyone has any questions, they're welcome to put it into the chat box. And at the end of all of the presentations, we'll have the panelists answer your questions. So thank you so much. Corinne, over to you.
So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Josh, for the lead-in. I just wanted to say that we've been working with Josh from USAID. He always tries to make himself available to participate in our project, and Christina, whom you're going to meet shortly, leads up the EGRA effort in Morocco and has been absolutely incredible to work with, and we'll talk more about that later. So anyway, let me just tell you a little bit about IDRT. We're a woman-owned small business that's 31 years old, and we were established with a mission to conduct research and technical assistance and product development for deaf people particularly, and for their families and service providers. And over the course of these 31 years, we've developed over 70 assistive technology products, mostly software. About half of our staff at any one time is deaf or hard of hearing. Now, about 15 years ago, IDRT began collaborating with a research team at a university in Rabat, Morocco. And the purpose of the collaboration was to bring education of deaf and hard of hearing children in Morocco into the 21st century. And the way we decided we were going to do that was by mirroring the team in the United States at IDRT in Morocco. At the time, they did not have any deaf employees, so we started incorporating deaf employees there. We started sharing IDRT software design, the content, the software code, our know-how and resources, and mingling them with the linguistic abilities that were already there in Morocco. Now, they had strong linguistic abilities in Arabic, but we started bringing in deaf people, as we said, into the team for the sign language abilities. And then we started networking with stakeholders throughout the country, parents, educators, deaf consumers, government entities, to get their input and feedback on what we were doing, and also to help us better implement our products. So let me give you a little context, and Josh was alluding to this. 95% of children in Morocco attend school, but 85% of deaf children don't, which means only 15% are in school, and especially girls are kept out of school. Now, for that 15% that are in school, there are almost no opportunities beyond 6th grade. Most of the teachers in those few programs have no training in special education, much less deaf education. They have weak sign language schools, and there are no sign language interpreters to assist them in the classroom. So this is one of the linguistic issues that we confront. Moroccan Sign Language is the native language of deaf Moroccans. It hasn't really been recognized very well before as a distinct language, and it's a language that is different than any of the spoken and written languages in Morocco. Now, one of the things that is challenging in building assistive technology is that MSL is not a written language. So if you want to represent it for any reading project, it has to be represented in graphics, video, or animation. Now, this is very important for deaf children because deaf children typically show suppressed achievement in reading, but they may understand content perfectly well if it is presented in sign language. So adding sign language to the reading process is extremely important. Now in 2015, as Josh said before, we became one of the grantees for the All Children Reading Competition. And just a month and a half ago, this 2-year agreement was extended for an additional year to give us time to do more things within Morocco. Now, our goal primarily is to improve the Arabic reading skills of deaf children in grades 1 and 2. And for this, we have partnered with the Ministry of National and Vocational Education, deaf associations who typically run the schools for the deaf, and also some stakeholders. Now, we have developed assistive technology and trained our stakeholders in use of the technology. We've developed a sign language friendly early grade reading assessment, and for the first time, a sign language assessment, and Christina's going to talk more about this. We've trained stakeholders in reading instructional techniques for young deaf and hard of hearing children. And we are gradually evaluating the impact of our technology on teachers and on the children. Now, to do this, we've met with and formed relationships with all 10 of our project programs. At the outset of the project, we established a steering committee of representatives of these associations, and the Ministry of National Education and Vocational Training has committed one of their staff members to this steering committee. Now, they became so excited about meeting, which was really the first time for them, that they decided they were going to meet on a monthly basis and at a different school each time because they never really had visited each other. They formed legislative and educational committees so they could address some of the pressing needs that are common throughout Morocco. And for the first time, they started sharing expertise. Now, our software, MSL Clip and Create, is complete, and we're actually working on the 3rd version. There are 6 sections to the software. The first is the dictionary that has over 1,900 Moroccan Sign Language graphics, videos, corresponding Arabic words, concept pictures, definitions in Arabic and MSL. And this is the largest attempt to document the lexicon of the MSL to date. It also has a publishing tool so teachers can make their own instructional materials, templates so teachers can automatically generate games like crossword puzzles and bingo cards and finger spelling scrambles and matching games. There are instructional strategies and, of course, instructions on using the software. Now, we recently completed an online mechanism whereby people from throughout Morocco can go on, register from what region they are, look at our signs, and indicate whether they have a regional sign language variation, and the software can capture them signing their regional variation and log it into the software. In that way, we can incorporate the regional variations into the database, but we're also incorporating other teacher requests, of course, the EGRA words and the national curriculum vocabulary words to help the schools for the deaf integrate into mainstream education. Plans are now underway to incorporate a thesaurus, a sign generator, and a story builder into the software. And the software has been distributed not just to the schools in our program, but also to teachers in higher grades and in schools throughout the country. We held our very first training a little over a year ago in Rabat with about 50 people in attendance. And we covered a lot of basic topics. As I said, there is no training in deaf education within Morocco, any formal university training. Now, the most important takeaways that we found the teachers had, which changed their perspectives and their educational strategies, were: one, the teachers realized they have to provide intense language stimulation early to their students. Two, they recognize that MSL is the native language of deaf children in Morocco, and they should be encouraging its use. And three, they should respect and promote deaf children's culture and identity. Now, in last December, we distributed computers and printers and projectors to the 10 schools in the project, and they got their first training on the equipment and on our software. We did follow-up training the very next month and focused more on computer literacy and the features of the software and instructional strategies. And there really is a wide variety of skills. I mean, we worked with several people who had never even held a mouse in their hands before. So it was quite challenging. And as you might notice, I have on a winter coat. There was no heat in the classrooms. By the second training, that was in like 2 weeks to a month, teachers that had this software, they'd already been making an avalanche of products with our software and have continued to use it on a daily basis. Under the guidance of School to School and World Vision, we've participated in the development, piloting, and database gathering of this early grade reading and sign language assessment. And for this, we had to convene a wide number of people, including deaf and hearing educators, test developers, evaluation specialists, and native signers. The instruments were pilot tested on 2 of our 10 schools. They were revised. They were tested again on the 8 schools. And then Christina most recently came back to Morocco and revised them again with one of our staff members, Dr. Mohammed Oknider. The findings have revealed that students' performance is very low in both reading and sign language. And we are slated in the fall to take the baseline data on about 185 students on the newly revised instruments. So I'm going to let Christina give you a more in-depth understanding of what we've been doing over there.
Thank you so much, Corinne. Christina, you can go ahead.
I feel really lucky to be able to present to you some of the work that we've been doing. So Josh and Corinne have been amazing partners to STS as we've embarked on trying to develop quality assessments for students who are participating in the projects that Josh mentioned, the 4 different projects that are a part of the All Children Reading Grand Challenge for Development Round 2, the focus area of children with disabilities. So there are 3 projects that are working with children who are blind or have low vision. And then there's the one project that Corinne just talked about more in depth. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about how we've worked on developing those assessments and what we've found through that process. So the first thing is, when we did the assessments and built the EGRA for students who are blind or have low vision, we've learned a lot. We made a lot of mistakes, but we also were able to really have some big takeaways that we feel like are really exciting, and we're really happy that we were able to kind of pilot new ways of doing this. We don't know of many other people. We've tried to reach out and talk to everybody that might be working in this area, and we realize that very few people are assessing students who are blind or have low vision in these projects, and so we're excited to be able to do some of that first work and be able to share our findings with you all. And hopefully this will generate a conversation about how to continue including students with disabilities more broadly, just as Josh was saying earlier. So when we did this, we found that we were able to use the same EGRA that the sighted students use. So in India, the Philippines, and Lesotho are the 3 countries that we were doing the project, that we were doing the assessments on for students who are low vision and blind. And all we did when we looked at the EGRA is we modified a few of the stories in terms of content. So if it was specifically talking about something that was a reference to something that a child would have to see, we modified the story so it was a little bit more clear for them and it wasn't something that they had to just conceptualize. So lots of students who are low vision or blind understand colors, understand visual cues, but it is a little bit more challenging and it's more conceptual. So we did try and make sure that the stories had been modified in a way that were most clear to those students, and so there wasn't something that maybe would be a little bit more challenging for them in terms of reading and comprehension. We provided 3 minutes on all fluency subtasks. So we worked with a lot of different people to try and figure out what was the best answer to this. So as many of you know, EGRA usually has a 1-minute mark that we use. And that was obviously too short. And one of the things that's challenging about this context is we had a lot of different needs from the students. We had students who were Braille readers, we had students who were large print readers, and we couldn't develop many accommodations for everybody because it was, we were trying to figure out how to make this a bit standard for our assessors to understand how best to do this. So we just provided 3 minutes across the board because obviously if they were able to read faster, that's fine. But if they did want to use all the 3 minutes, we also wanted them to have plenty of time, given that many of them are using magnifiers, many of are using book stands. We had some students in different positions trying to be able to get close enough to the text to be able to read it if they were low vision. And the Braille text, of course, the students could read. It's a little bit slower to use a tactile approach to reading, and so we wanted to make sure they had enough time. We had 3 different options of stimuli in the different countries. So we had a large print option for students who were low vision, and we printed them at 18 and 24 font, which are the 2 standard options that they were given in their classroom. So we tried to think about what was a large print option that they might already be receiving and mimic that in our testing environment. And then for Braille, it depended on the environment. So some Braille is contracted, and so not all of the letters are displayed, so students can read faster, and some Braille is uncontracted. And for example, in English, in America, often kids learn contracted Braille in, I think, grades 2 or 3, and it gets progressively. They learn all the letters and then they learn the contractions. So in the Philippines, for example, we actually did an EGRA in both Filipino and English with the students because they have bilingual classrooms starting in grade 1. And so the grade 3 students start reading contracted Braille, but obviously the grade 1 students would be quite confused with contracted Braille, having vowels removed and things like that. So we wanted to make it very clear for each student what they should have, but it also made it a bit challenging for us to figure out what's their vision status and what is the right stimuli for them and how best to teach the assessors to provide the right thing for the right students. And then we had students be able to use their accommodations, so whatever they were using in their classroom. Many of them had book stands, had magnifier glasses that they would use when they were reading if they were low vision. Some students felt better laying down because that was a more comfortable approach for them to read. So we allowed whatever that was standard in their classroom, we allowed them to do that. And then we were able to use Tangerine. So all of the EGRAs for the students who are low vision and blind, we were able to use electronic data capture for that, which was really nice to be able to standardize that approach and minimize what the assessors had to do with the students. So one of the things is about all of this is it obviously didn't go smoothly. There's lots of challenges with all of this. One of the first things was it was really challenging to pilot and equate different versions of the test because the populations are so low. And so, for example, in Lesotho, there's only one school that you can really work with for students who are low vision or blind and where they actually go to attend school as a designation. So for us to pilot, we had nowhere else to go to actually have students that were similar and had a similar experience and learning in a similar language. In the Philippines, we had some options, but they didn't always represent exactly what the schools were that we were going to do the assessment in. So it really, we ended up piloting with very limited numbers and not what we would normally do when we pilot or validate an EGRA. We did not have those opportunities in this, and that made it really challenging. And it also made it really challenging to figure out what are similar experiences with these students, because they do go to a lot of different kinds of schools and people have very different approaches and philosophies on how they teach these students. And so trying to understand how to find similarities across those was really challenging for us. The stimuli and the printing in Braille especially was very challenging in India. It had to be hand printed. We didn't have a Brailler close, so we had somebody in the workshop actually using a slate and stylus to create it. And there were lots of errors, and so then just kind of going through the process of vetting that, and then when you had to fix it, you have to fix the whole page, and that takes a lot more time. And so building in a lot of time to create stimuli and then review it was really important to us, and that was quite challenging in the beginning. And this is similar to the other issue, but because there were such small areas for us to pilot and equate these tests, there were also very limited opportunities for assessors to practice prior to actual data collection. So we were lucky that most of the schools, most of the assessors in each of these projects had experiences with these schools. And so they did understand how to work with these students, and they understood the basics of the EGRA administration, but it was challenging because most of these people are not assessment people. So teaching them how to be sort of rigid in terms of the protocols, but warm and inviting to the students, we wanted to make sure that they got that right before we sent them out to actually do the data collection. And that was hard because we only had maybe one or two schools to do that with, and maybe only a few students. So that proved challenging. A lack of standardized identification process was also hard. Some countries do better than others at having some sort of assessment around what the students' needs are. Is it just that they're low vision and blind, or do they have another disability? We know that a lot of the students in our projects that we were assessing did have multiple disabilities, but they aren't well known or well addressed. And so when we were going into the classrooms, we knew that we weren't sure exactly what all of their backgrounds were, and obviously they would respond differently to these interventions depending on some of their other disabilities that they might be experiencing. And so it was hard for us to make a decision about how do we make sense of that. We obviously don't assessors to say we think that this is happening with this student, but we didn't necessarily have those assessments. So it's very mixed in terms of who's in the group, and we don't always know a lot of the other things that are happening for that student and how that might impact the interventions, actual impact on their students' reading. And then just trying to understand the contextual factors, whether it's the home environment. I think Josh alluded to this quite a bit in his, but a lot of these students are facing challenges of parents that don't believe that they can be readers, and parents that don't think that they should go to school longer than maybe 6th grade, and teachers that haven't always believed in them. So trying to understand even the environment, not just the physical aspect of their disabilities, but the context around how they've been raised, when they were brought to school. Many of the students we found in these projects are very out of the correct age range for those grades that they're in. So we have 13 and 14-year-olds who are finally brought to school when they were maybe 9 or 10, and they're in grade 1 or 2 now. And so just really trying to understand that it was very hard. So, we know that there's a lot of challenges at home for them and other things that they are facing. And I'm not sure that we always were able to capture that. And those might be more predictive of what kind of change we could expect to see from some of the different projects. And then the last thing is some projects were providing hardware, so they provided a Jotadot, which is like a hand brailer for small students, young students. And then some were also providing actual reading materials, and so trying to also distinguish the difference between having access to a computer that has a Braille keypad versus actually having a book in Braille. And so a lot of our projects did a mix of those things, and distinguishing what parts of that project were meaningful was hard. So those are the 3 projects and that's what we did for the children who were blind and low vision. And so we've completed the assessments on all 3 of those projects. One of those reports is already on the All Children Reading website. The second report is in the final stages of being approved, hopefully, knock on wood. And then the final one will be written and approved soon, hopefully, as well. And so we will, if anybody wants to have access to those or have any questions of STS, please do reach out. We'd love to talk to you more about it. Now I'm going to transition to talking about the project that we've been assessing in Morocco. So there was one project that was working with students who are deaf or hard of hearing. And Corinne has already talked about this quite a bit. There's 10 schools throughout Morocco, 100 and I guess she said 80 students. In the original one, it was about 150. Lots and lots of regional variations in the signs that are used across the school sites. We found that there's a lot of different philosophies about language use in the classroom. So do teachers teach sign language? Do they teach oral language? Do they teach a combination? What do they value in terms of their students? So one school requires students to spend 3 years attending speech therapy before they go to grade 1. And some schools, start with sign language in grade 1 right away and have that be the primary mode of instruction and communication in the school. So very different approaches and values around what language is produced by the students. The schools are managed by deaf associations, which means that there's no curriculum from the ministry and there's no benchmarks from the ministry. So schools often use the same textbook as their hearing peers, but they don't necessarily follow it in the same progression. Some schools take 2 or 2.5 years to do 1 grade of the book, but there's no standardization and they're not accredited in any way. So schools can make up their own approach to how they want to do language and reading instruction. So for the student assessment, they tested a little bit. It was an EGRA and a sign language assessment. So we have this terrible word, EGRA-SLA. I don't know where it came from. I mean, I know the acronym, but it's not a great thing to have to say out loud. We also did an expressive vocabulary test where students saw pictures and expressed what the picture was in sign language. And we did a questionnaire. For teachers, we did an observation, a vocabulary test, and a questionnaire as well to try and understand what the capacity was of the teachers as well and what kind of environment the students were in. So on the EGRA, we had the letter name identification, syllable identification, familiar word reading. They signed the reading passage, so normally it's the oral reading passage, and so in this case, students read it and signed it to the assessor, and were asked reading comprehension questions. And then we had the comprehension test. So that's where instead of having the assessor say a story to the student, it was signed to the student. And in this case, we actually had, if you see in the lower corner of this presentation, that is one of the deaf staff members that works with Corinne. And we actually created a video of the story. So it was the same listening comprehension story that hearing students in Morocco had used on their EGRA. And so we created a video of it so it could be a standardized way to present it to students. So it was on a tablet, and the assessor would play the story and then play the questions. And then the upper corner is the student using the stimuli and signing it to the assessor. So in terms of these assessment instruments, in addition to the EGRA, we did do an expressive vocabulary test. So they saw a picture and they had to present a sign for it. And that was so we had some sense of their language outside of just reading. So we wanted to know, do they at least have 25 to 30 vocabulary words that we think are fairly basic in nature versus the reading, right? So we wanted to get a little bit of a sense of that, especially because we know students don't have great language abilities in some of these schools, especially in sign language, because that hasn't been a focus of how the schools have taught the students. We did the questionnaire for both students and teachers, including things like sign language exposure. We tried to figure out if the teachers maybe had a deaf family member, because those teachers tended to be much more proficient in sign language and value having sign language in the classroom, as opposed to teachers who maybe had never experienced or interacted with somebody proficiently in sign language before coming to the school. And then the classroom observation. And so we looked at what kind of classroom approaches were being used and how often, and what were the interactions with students. So again, we learned a lot, and we continue on this project especially. I feel like we continue to learn a lot every time we do one step forward. Same issue with before, it's a really small population that's actually attending schools. And the schools are so different that piloting instruments proved challenging as well. We tried to pilot the instruments at one school, and those students barely use sign language at all because the school really, really valued oral language. So they focused on manipulating the students' mouths to form letters and words and didn't really provide a lot of sign language instruction. And Corinne's project that she shared about is about increasing sign language and reading. So for us, we needed to be an environment where kids probably had some access to sign language prior to, so we could at least understand if these were proper instruments for those students. And so that was really challenging, and we had to find another environment to be able to really test the instruments prior to use for data collection. It's long. It takes a long time to find the instructions, to be sure that the students know what's happening in the story, in the test. Many of these students have never been assessed before, especially not in a standardized way. So that was really challenging. It just took a long time, and we wanted them to feel comfortable. And we had a lot of other things that we were collecting. So it wasn't just an EGRA. We did the EGRA, we used the tablet to do the story, we did the sign language, we did the vocabulary test, and we did a questionnaire. So altogether, quite a bit of time. We did a mixed kind of data collection. We used paper for some aspects of the data collection, and then we were able to use Tangerine for some other aspects of it. And we did video some of the fluency tests because only really on the letter test did we have to video it. So the word reading and the story, the students never signed faster than the assessor could mark in real time, but for the letters they could sign them quite quickly. So an assessor might miss what the answer was to one or two of them. And that's what we piloted, and we found that, yeah, it was only on this one test, or this one fluency test that we needed to video. The rest of them were fine because the students just weren't reading that fast for the teacher to not catch everything. So for the rest of the data collection, they would just video all the students' letter naming test, and then they would review it at night, and then they would score it based on the video rather than live scoring. We had a lot of challenges getting two assessors to both communicate to the students in a similar way and to mark things similarly. Part of that does go back to Moroccan Sign Language is not, it's not very standardized, and the regional variations really do make a difference in how you communicate and what's comprehensible language for each other and for students. And so having somebody even from Casablanca and Rabat, it wasn't always clear what was the right answer. And so we often used the sign language in the software as a guide, but even still, how they communicate with students and what they would say is yes or no, right or wrong, was just really hard. So we actually divided. In terms of having reliability, we just decided one person will do this aspect with all students, and one person will do the other tasks. So one of our assessors did all of the EGRA subtasks, and the other assessor did the vocabulary test and did the comprehension test and did the student questionnaire. So that way we didn't have to have unreliable results where people were marking different things. So at least we know that the same person has marked all of the subtasks on the EGRA, so that's very clear what those responses are. So they either got them all right or all wrong based on her, but at least it's reliable, which was the best we could do. And then finally, you know, this continues to prove challenging is, do we use the software as a guide because we are measuring what the software is providing to the students versus do we measure what the students are actually using in their classroom, which is quite different. And the results, when we did it, we were able to mark in the software, like the students were giving the sign that's in the software versus they're giving a comprehensible sign, but it's not the sign that has been used in the software to date. And we did find a lot more correct answers when we allowed any sign to be provided as a correct answer. So we are really challenged in terms of we want to measure the intervention that Corinne and her team are providing, but we also want to provide a very accurate view of what the students can do and what they know. And sometimes it's challenging when you only use the software because a lot of the students don't have access to those signs in their normal environment. So we found from the data collection that we did last year, it was our pilot data collection, the pilot results found that students do vary across grade and gender and school. So grade 1 students didn't perform as well as grade 2, so that was good, and that was good to be, it wasn't as expected, but it was nice to actually see those results. Gender was not, it wasn't clear exactly which students at some schools, girls at some schools performed better than girls at other schools, and we didn't know why that was. So we want to dig into that a little bit more next year. One of the things that was really tricky for us is on the same subtask, there might, especially like letters, the students might see it multiple times, and they would sometimes sign it correctly and sometimes not sign it correctly. So that was, it's confusing to us, and we don't know if they got caught up in the moment and signing too quickly, or if they only recognized it. Arabic is quite challenging, you know, and maybe they recognized it in one scenario but not the other, but we weren't sure why that was. Some of the relationships that we found were that the students' expressive vocabulary test, so that's the EVT, was a predictor of reading passage fluency. So students who were better at the vocabulary test were also better at signing the reading passage. So that was great. It's good to know that, like, if you have good vocabulary outside of reading, it also then translates to reading, which is what we wanted to see, but we weren't sure if we would find that. Syllable identification and familiar word reading were also good predictors of being better at the reading passage fluency. So the better you were in your syllable identification and your reading words, and the quicker and better you were at reading words more accurate, you also then read the passage better. The comprehension story where we had the tablet and it was a signed story, it was quite engaging and really well done. It failed miserably. Students didn't understand the story, partly from the regional issues, maybe partly because it was on a tablet, but we have found that it just didn't work. So it didn't correlate with anything. The results were very, very low, and it didn't really tell us exactly how well. It didn't, even kids that were very good at finding a reading passage and comprehending and finding comprehension questions could not figure out what was happening on the tablet. So that didn't work well. And so we didn't really have a great measure of comprehension because none of the students read enough in the passage to really show us variance on their reading comprehension. And of course, the tablet-based signed language comprehension test didn't work. So we still don't really know how much those students comprehend. So something that we learned from that is, you know, Arabic letters and diacritics and simple words are still very challenging for the students in this population, and a lot of them didn't perform as well as you would hope for grades 1, 2, and 3 to perform. We continue to have challenges on what's the correct answer, you know, do we measure against the software and what's been decided to put in the software, or do we measure against what is comprehensible at that school? And how to do that well continues to be challenging. We want to revise the subtasks and make sure that we want to figure out what the inconsistencies were in the subtasks, why some students were able to do the letter correctly in one place but not in another. And we wanted to have more exploration of the natural language use. So this test showed a small picture, but could we find out how well students are able to express themselves in sign language, or how well does the teacher teach in sign language? So we really wanted to learn more about that before we revised the test. So I went in May and spent time with Corinne's team there. And we traveled to 6 of the 10 schools to get a better sense of what is happening in the schools, especially around natural language use. So we took 200 familiar words, and we had every school have a younger student, so in a grade 1 or 2 classroom, and an older student, grade 5 or 6, provide the signs for those 200 words, and then have the teachers also provide the signs. So we wanted to understand how proficient are the teachers as well as the students in the 200 signs that we think are correct, and also how different are the words across the different schools. So do we have 6 different variations of the word, or do we have 2 or 3? And we wanted to have that recorded somewhere, because right now we don't. We provided 4 different reading stories to get a better sense of perhaps stories that might fit the population better, and did them untimed so we could just see how well kids can read with unlimited time. And we just, again, did this with 2 different students in each school, just as a kind of little test of their abilities. We did 2 sign language comprehension stories and questions, and this time we did not use the video. We did it live, so the assessor provided the story and then asked comprehension questions, and that went much, much better. So I think we've sort of solved the issue around the tablet and video versus doing it live. And then we also just did some open-ended discussion with pictures and storytelling. So we asked both teachers and students to look at pictures and describe what they saw in sign language, and then we also asked them to tell us a story about how they were going to celebrate Ramadan, which everybody has lots and lots to say about their favorite foods and what they're going to do. So it was a nice way to be able to see, can teachers talk to us in sign language for an extended period of time about a topic that they should be able to talk about, and then how much can the students provide. And we videoed that, so we were able, and we're looking at that now to look at fluency and proficiency and how well that expression was able to be captured from them. And so basically, we're going to take all of this and we're going to use that to update those instruments to be able to try and do a better job representing what students really do know, and a better way to measure what Corinne's team is providing as an intervention. So we feel like we did a decent job in the pilot, and I think we're going to have a much better measure or set of measures in the fall for her next year of intervention. And I wanted to kind of pull back a bit. So outside of just trying to build a good assessment and make sure that we do right by assessing these students and how we do, I also want to share some reflections that I think all of us have had who have participated in this process, and some of the things that we feel have been a result. So these are not just my reflections, but sort of the ACR team, Corinne, Josh, some of the local partners in Morocco. I think all of us feel like it's pretty amazing to finally have students who are deaf and hard of hearing actually assessed on their language and reading abilities. So people are starting to become aware of the lack of standards and curriculum and materials that are being provided to these schools means that the schools do lots of different things, and that leads to lots of different outcomes for these students. And I think now people are starting to really get a better sense of that. When we did the workshop that Corinne talked about, when we convened everybody to do the adaptation, we definitely had people that didn't recognize that MSL was a language. So that needs to be addressed, and there is a lot of issues around just raising awareness about what is how sign language should be viewed and how to give credibility as a language. And this idea around lots of schools don't provide good language environments for their students, so naturally reading is also very challenging because they are sort of language deprived, and when they come to reading, that's really challenging. We really think that this increased exposure to this population, and it also, as I was saying earlier, it did highlight teacher preparation issues, school funding issues, and there's a lot of advocacy work that Corinne's team is doing in this next year. Another challenge was, participants that were deaf and hard of hearing were definitely not seen as leaders or even key participants in the process always, and that was really challenging. It's their language, it's their community, and yet they're sort of marginalized and pushed to the side, and hearing people are making lots of decisions about language. So we hope that this has raised awareness, not just about reading, but really about language. We think that language is really the critical piece here, that reading can follow and will follow, but first language really needs to be drilled down and supported in these schools, and there needs to be kind of a shift in terms of the kind of language provided to the students at a younger age.